So, what exactly are we going to be talking about here with demographics as destiny, right? We need to understand, especially from a business perspective, what it is that's currently here in Eagle and what's going to likely change, right? And it's a science that's more rooted in fact than like artistry, because we know that there are certain things that are just going to happen. I want to start though by at least getting a sense of where you all might be with the pieces of paper in front of each of you. If you could look at the top set of questions, I'd like you to start to think about what your perspective is on the town of Eagle that we currently have. How many people might live in town? Work on that as I'm going through the rest of this agenda. Just, ask yourself some of those questions, write them down, because by the end of this, we'll be able to check and see how well you may have understood at least that perspective in town right now. We're going to talk about who has the money here in town and how you can actually tell some of that on a larger scale. What do they do with that money? And how does it impact your business? And not just your business, but the town overall. Again, when you can start to look at things from a little bit larger scale, like we have to at the town, you're going to understand business trends before they happen. And that's part of the reason why I want to have this talk with you today, is to equip each of you with the sort of foresight to say, hey, how are things going to move in this industry, in this valley? How can I better position myself for what is coming, not respond to what has already happened? And then lastly, we're going to talk about the future of Eagle. So these are the questions that you've got on the top of your page. Please take a second to think about them, write them down, because like I said, we'll see whether or not you guessed correctly here by the end of all of this. Each of these, I guarantee, we'll be able to cover at some point in the slides. The important overall things, and this is straight from Elizabeth Gardner and the State Demographer's Office, but these trends to watch for Colorado in general are really important, right? The population growth is slowing, and it might not feel that way here, but Eagle and Eagle Valley has had a net population decrease over the past couple of years, right? Over the past 10, it's been about flat. It doesn't feel that way though, because we see a lot of people rotating and churning in and out. Folks that used to be able to live here are leaving, and folks are coming in to take their place. So while there is churn, doesn't mean the population necessarily has gone up a bunch. So while everyone talks about density and traffic and all of these other concerns, the reality is that isn't bearing out in the data, right? But we need to understand also that where we're at right now when it comes to jobs, we're at the peak, and we are not projected to go up. For the next 20 years, we're projected to go down. Slightly less population growth and certainly less job growth. So you need to plan for that. And it's all about aging. So, quick question, how many of you had a birthday last year? Couple, right? Yeah. That right there is why this is statistics. This isn't like art, by understanding this. If you can understand that demographics and the projections that come from demographics are based on the fact that everyone ages, guaranteed, right? When you understand where you currently are at, and you understand what's coming and going to age into certain parts of the population, how are those folks going to respond and participate in the economy? That's what turns this into a science and not art, right? It's all based on the data, and it's based on the fact that we know that everyone's going to age. So it's a matter of what do they do when they age. So here's Eagle County's births and deaths, right? We had a spike, 2008, 2009. How old does that make those kids today? Right? So we've got a whole lot of kids in this valley who are in schools, right? Especially middle schools and high schools. But if you've talked to anyone from Eagle Valley School District lately, they're planning for less classrooms. They're planning for less kids, right? Because that trough afterwards has stayed pretty flat. That's coming. So those kids who are 12 and 13 right now, growing into teenage years, growing into the time when they get their own decisions about their own money, How are we gonna handle that? The unfortunate part, Eagle doesn't have a whole lot of those 20-somethings right here, right? You'll see a huge spike. You'll see a huge spike around 24, 25. Any guesses why that's the case? Why do we see that huge spike? Kids are coming back after college. And if you want to talk about what kind of an economic driver having a college is in your town, how many of you grew up or at least have lived a significant part of your life in a town with an R1, like top tier university, dorms and all of that stuff? Yeah, some tangible experience. The economies in those towns are significantly different than the economy in a town like Eagle. And if you've lived in one of those, you should know what I mean. You're never out for dishwashers, right? You always have a dishwasher. You always have somebody who can come in and man the front desk at a information-based job, right? You have somebody who can work in insurance, typing in some data, right? Those kind of things are always there. When you don't have those 18 to 24-year-olds, that's gone. That's part of the workforce that's completely missing. We get the 25 to 30-somethings, and most of them are up valley, right? Eagle has a fair amount of 35 to 50, and then you can start to see it tail off after that. But this graph is really important because we need to think about what's going to happen when we shift it all over 5 to 10 years. What we do need to consider, though, is that Eagle County, I didn't know this until a couple days ago, is the second youngest county in the entire state of Colorado. Second youngest, average age 33. Any 33-year-olds in here? I'm not either, I'm just raising my hand. But 33 is the target, right? But as I just showed you, we have a whole lot of 30 to 50, right? And while we might be young now, we are aging incredibly fast. And we need to plan for that. So, yeah, well, those birthdays, they keep coming. So here's the population distribution in Eagle. For that question about how many families have kids at home, 10 to 19 is almost 20%. 0 to 10 is 16%. So roughly 40%, I should see some hands go up. How many of you have a kid, 19 or under, at home? What is that, 40, 45%? Right? Stats, man, I love them. Math is always math. It's like, and then you see that 20 to 29 that is completely bottomed out, right? This is a concern. Because from a town's perspective, from an economic perspective, you want to have a good, well-rounded amount of population for all sort of age bands, right? And when you see this big of a gap in your local population, it has an impact. Ask Gary and Lonnie. Ask anyone who's tried to hire somebody, right? Because you've likely tried to hire someone in that age band. That's a problem, right? So we're going to talk about that. You'll see a huge spike in the 30 to 39, 40 to 49, and then it trails off after that. But I want to show you, this is very interesting. This is Eagle County. This is Eagle. This is Vail. Where did all those 20 to 29-year-olds go? And Jen, thank you. You were just right? They're all in Vail. Almost 22%. 20 to 29-year-olds in the entire county are in Vail. Right? Massive. And then the trade-off is that you see the 40 to 49-year-olds dip. Why? Because they're all down here. You know, everyone's down here having those kids. You see a spike when it gets a little older, people retiring. But again, the 20 to 29, if you want to talk about demographics as destiny, you want to track this band. Why? Because the 30 to 45-year-olds are the golden goose. They're the ones that have a whole bunch of discretionary income. They buy houses, they buy cars, they go out to eat. They're the ones that drive the economy, especially in a consumer-driven economy. So to some, in Eagle, here's what we're looking at for net migration. And when I said, oh my God, population's generally flat in town, and there's simply a lot of churn, this is the churn. And on net, 35 and up, the folks that likely grew up in the area, they're having to leave. They can't afford it. We import a bunch of the 20 to 25-year-olds, but the reality is not even they necessarily are able to stay, because as soon as they hit 30, 35, they leave as well. So we need to understand why. One other important information, or piece of information, is not only what's the age, but what's the educational attainment. Because as we all know, people that have degrees and more than one degree, maybe you're a little foolish with your life. I will jump on that grenade. But it gives you a whole lot more opportunity for potential purchasing power. And so it's one thing to say we have a whole bunch, or we have a lack of 20 to 29-year-olds that don't have a high school education. That's a different story than having a bunch of 20 to 29-year-olds that have 1 or 2 degrees, right? Completely different quality of workforce. Eagle is very fortunate to not have a major university in town. We have a whole lot of folks with a bachelor's degree, right? So generally speaking, our population is very intelligent. One last thing to consider is, where are they going? And here, this is the controversial graph. One of the first things I remember having a conversation with Mick about last year is, we published this as part of our Elevate Eagle data findings, and we were like, wait a minute, everyone talks about Eagle as being a bedroom community, and the reality is, look who's employed in the selected area and lives outside. Eagle is a job center, guys. We are not a bedroom community. We are a job center. We have a net higher number of people that work in town than leave town for work. That's pretty cool, especially when everyone's like, oh my God, bedroom community, everyone works up valley. They don't, not anymore.
It took me months to let that sink in.
And it has ramifications, doesn't it? It's important. A lot of folks work out of their home. But we have an opportunity for a self-sustaining economy here. And when I talk about, again, demographics as destiny, the destiny that we need to sort of create strategically here in town is one where we can be self-sufficient. We're going to talk about tourism and some of that stuff in a second. But I want you to see that it can happen because it's already started. The other thing that's worth pointing out, the big blue circle and that little yellow circle there, what is that? That's traffic. That's traffic. The people in the green are the ones who can bike to work. The people in the green are the ones who can take a local bus if there was one to work. Walk to work. Live close to where they work. Right? Walk downstairs to go shopping. Not the ones in the other 2 colors. So one other point that's worth noting about demographics is that if you're not planning for it, it will happen to you whether you like it or not, because we are in a free country. People will move to Gypsum and drive through our town, right? People will move to Vail and drive through our town. But that is something to consider. So who has the money? Unfortunately, Eagle County has not recovered near as well from the recession as the rest of the state. So while we do have a fair amount of folks in town that are of a very appropriate level for spending, the average wage in town and in Eagle County has not recovered. And that's something to address. And when I said that there's a net job, so there's more jobs, but there's a net migration out of town. This is what we're talking about. From 2015 to 2018, there's a slowing in jobs, and there's a projected continual slowing for the next 20 years. But people are already getting priced out, and our net migration is down. And where are the jobs? This shouldn't surprise anybody. Again, this is Eagle Valley, not just Eagle, right? Tourism, almost 60%. Now, the problem with this is while it's great for some, we all know that tourism is not one of the highest paying industries out there, right? Whole lot of accommodation, whole lot of food service, whole lot of low paying jobs. The stuff that we need to focus on is right here. Regional services are the things that impact your quality of life. Regional services are the things that when I talk about an internal self-sustaining municipal economy, these are your grocers, these are your small retailers, these are your insurance and financial providers, right? These are your service industries like hair salons, right? Yoga. This is the category we care about. What have we got here? And of the regional services, this shouldn't be much of a surprise. How many of you directly or even indirectly have an association with the health industry? That is actually a little surprising. There should be more. Because the health industry in this valley is one of the better, more sustainable, higher paying industries, right? And we're very fortunate to have their presence here. But that is the easiest one. Fire is financial, real estate. That one does go up a bit in tourism economies, but business services as well, right? When we're talking about growing regional services, if you have a business that is in business services, this conversation's for you. Because you need to know what businesses are coming to town. And when I talked about the wages, here's the unfortunate reality. By far, the number one employment sector in this valley is one of the lowest paying sectors that we have. So we just talked about who's here, but who has the money? A lot of the folks that are here are not well positioned for discretionary income, right? They're having a hard time paying for stuff. The ones that we care about, again, if we're being strategic, we care about those in green because when you're in construction, health services, professional, technical, financial, wholesale trade, information and management, you can afford to live here, right? So how do we make that a thing? How do we grow the green and how do we reduce our dependence on the red and even some of the blue? So this is the only chart that I'm going to show you that I made, right? Everything else came from the state demographer's office, right? So I'm not inventing any of this, but this is data pulled from the Vail Valley Partnership and their employment survey in 2016. And so strategically, from a town's perspective, I wanted to understand what industries do we need to focus and target in as a town to be sustainable. The data itself, again, is it's all there. It's the number of how many people we have employed, what's the average wage, all of that kind of stuff. But I wanted to find what are some core industries that can afford to live here, what has a high internal need, local production, right, but imports as well. And the green and the red, the difference in each of those colors is what is the amount of imports and exports that we see relative to the rest of the industries, right? Because if we're importing, we have a need. If we have local production, we have a way to solve that need internally. And do they pay enough to make it work here? That's why the three particular industries that you see colored in green and some of the tertiary ones in like a limeish green, in my opinion, are the industries that we as a town need to work on. And I think this should ring consistent for all of those who are on the Economic Vitality Committee. From day one, I've been saying, hey, here's where we need to grow, right? So we now know who we have in town. We have a whole lot of 30 to 45-year-olds with kids. We know that they have bachelor's degrees, if not more. And we have a sense of what industries are here and what we want to see here. How can we make that happen? Well, first off, it's all about, if you've seen this real quick, what can you tell by measuring rooftops? That's how we do all this, is measure the rooftops. You can tell the general per capita of each of those jobs by the house they're able to buy. Because the biggest part of their income goes towards a house. The red is housing. And this is by band, right? We've got 159K plus, 110.84 all the way down to 24K. One of the myths that I think a lot of folks have is that when you have folks that are of a higher income level, that they spend significantly more on discretionary and other sort of durable goods. That's not the case here. Everyone spends roughly the same amount as a percentage of their income on the same basic needs. And just because you have somebody who's making $160K a year, they don't spend significantly more than somebody making $30K a year on dining out. They might spend double, but they're not making only double the salary, they're making 4 times the salary, right? Where that money goes, personal insurance and pensions, financial services, investments, right? That's where the money goes if you have a wealthy population. Everything else is pretty much the same. But we want to focus on the housing part for right now. That's why we're counting rooftops. So here in town, we have 1,857 rooftops, units of some sort. How that split looks is a really good determining factor of what our jobs are going to look like. Because here in town, again, this shouldn't be a surprise, 83.9% is single-family homes. That's crazy. I have never in my life lived in a community with 84% single-family homes, detached with a yard. That's crazy. It fits. We saw at the beginning, we have a whole bunch of families with kids, 30 to 45, that generally have discretionary income enough to buy a single-family home. Makes perfect sense.
But it's self-fulfilling.
That's exactly right. If you build it, they will come.
Do you know what the number is in gypsum?
I don't. I didn't pull up their number. But yes, if you build the housing, the job will come, because a house is where a job sleeps at night. As much as we want to grow an economy that's focused on certain industries, if you don't have a place for that job to live, that job isn't going to come. It might, but it's very, very difficult. You can tell what is coming by the rooftops. This is also important to consider. We have 1,800, right? We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's going on in future Eagle. Just understand right now, our current count's about 1,800. When I talk about jobs and houses being where jobs sleep at night, this is another thing that's very important to consider. Based on how much your income is, you have a propensity to live in a certain type of house. If you have less than 60% average median income, you'd prefer to live in a multifamily dwelling unit. Apartments, preferably rental, right? Condos, duplexes, single family. As you gain an average income, AMI, your propensity to buy a single family house increases. So this is another way to consider, if we have 1,800 houses of any way, shape, or form, what percentage of what do we want to have to accommodate the jobs that we want to have? If we don't have the right balance, we're not going to have those houses full. This is a little bit of good news. Eagle's average house is slightly less than the county's average, 500K. Boulder's average is nearly $1 million, which is nuts. So 500 seems attainable. But the thing that I want you to think about, when we have 84% single-family homes, what is the impact? And it's right here. When we look at the impact of rental households and whether or not those folks are stretched for their dollar, this is what happens. 71+% pay more than 30% of their income on housing. That's too high. Look at the single-family homes. 17% pay more than 30% of their income on their mortgage. 71% for rentals. We are disincentivizing the lower-end rental market, and people do not have the money to afford this market for that product. Okay, so this is total housing units and vacant housing units, right? 262 vacancies here in town. Generally pretty small. Here's Vail. And when people say that we have a housing crisis in the Eagle River Valley, this is, I think, one of the most telling slides ever. We don't have a housing crisis, we have a housing allocation crisis. Because 4,800 of the rooftops in Vail Go to folks that don't live in town. 4,800. That's a whole lot. If 2.6 is the average people per household, 4,800 homes is another 10,000 people who could potentially live in the valley and not build another single home. Just in Vail. It's crazy. Crazy. But that is the reality of where we're at.
So I assume those are the second homeowners?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to completely dismiss that industry, right? There's a lot of real estate folks in the room. Yes. When we saw that huge construction number, and we saw there's a relatively high amount of income that comes from the real estate industry. That's what they're selling, is second homes. A little bit more insulated, a little more self-sustaining would be selling first homes, only homes, owner occupied. But that does drive part of our industry. So when we're talking about what size rooftops we might have and the propensity for single family, where do those folks spend their money, right? Here's the average split where an individual spends their money every year. The discretionary stuff is generally pretty small, right? And I'm sure that the numbers here are hard to see that far out. Please look this up if you get the slides later on. But I want you again to see that housing is the number one, utilities, gas, and transportation 2 and 3, right? When we're talking about where this money goes, each rooftop itself does not have that much money to contribute on an annual basis, right? Clothing, $1,800. So for every rooftop you see in town, if you have a clothing store, they're going to spend roughly on average $1,800. How much of that is going to you? And is $1,800 enough based on your average customer count? If you only see 5 customers a day, 1,800 divided by 365, what does that give you? Maybe $4 a day, right? If you get 10 customers a day, is that enough to build a business on? Probably not, right? How many additional roofs do we need to be able to get that number high enough to where you feel like you can make the numbers work? Again, I want to go back to this to show you across income bands, the difference is really in pensions and financial services. And this is the whole dining out thing. I know restaurants are a big demand here in town, right? Food away from home, this is dining out. If you look at the 30 to 40K, which is the third column over, that column doesn't necessarily represent much more money every year than the 70 to 100. The only time you start seeing significantly more is over here, 150 to 200K. And that is not the average income here, right? In that respect, if you have a restaurant, having somebody that's 40 to 50,000 a year in salary come in is likely going to do more for you to add more of those than to have the folks who are already here move up to this band. If you're talking about what could potentially change your business, what can I model my customer count on? You're not going to have the folks that are making 150 to 200 come in more than double everyone else in town. So future Eagle, what do we have coming up? When I said that there's a potential job loss, guys, I hate to break it to you, but there's a lot of economists and statisticians who are saying that we are at the peak of a job market. And the reason isn't because of any sort of dastardly change or, automation or mechanics or outsourcing or anything else. It's because everyone's getting older. We have the baby boomer generation who has been generally the economic engine of this entire economy, nationwide, aging into a place where they are no longer serving in jobs. From 2020, a 1.7 per year job growth, you won't see another higher number on the board for the next 30 years. 2025 is 1.1, and it goes below 1% below that. So again, here's the total household projection, and from 2010 to 2020, you can see Eagle County is generally pretty flat. Total number of rooftops, about 20,000. We have not had a whole lot of new products come online. The general forecast, you can see that slope, it may look steep, but let's look at the numbers on the side, right? So for 2025, we're looking at growing maybe 21,000 house rooftops to 25,000 rooftops, maybe 24,000. That's only a total of about 3,500 between now and 2025. That's not a whole lot. That's like one development, countywide, right? And in the pipeline, Town of Eagle has 1,556 in the planning department in some way, shape, or form. And that number is a little high. The gray box is Red Mountain Ranch. Red Mountain Ranch does not have an approved annexation and development plan, right? We have a projection for 180 some units. That is not approved. The other ones are approved. Downtown Broadway with 66 new units coming in, approved. Reserve at Hockett Gulch, 500 approved. And Haymeadow, 847. One of the big questions, though, is what is that rooftop going to look like? What is that rooftop going to look like? What's going to happen next in this town and in our economy depends on what that rooftop looks like. And when I'm talking about countywide concerns, here's another very interesting chart that I found. This is from the 2018 Eagle County Housing Study. The number one place that people want to live in the entire valley is Eagle. I was a little surprised by that. Given a choice between where you live and where you want to live, no one wants to live in Gypsum. 13% have to live there, but they choose, or if they had a choice, would choose not to. The number one choice is Eagle. And again, free country, we don't have borders, we don't have toll roads. If somebody wants to move around in the valley, this is how they're going to move, by preference, right? They want to move here, whether we like it or not. So we can plan for it, or we can not plan for it. But they still want to move here. But this is a very interesting sort of driver. In this housing study, it showed the gap between the net migration and the jobs that we currently have unfilled, right? And I think we can all speak to this because we found it really hard to hire, right? In town, right now, 2020, the total housing gap for the county is 4,000 units. 4,000 units. That's the gap. We could bring 1,500 homes or rooftops on board right now and still not solve that gap, especially considering that we're the number one place people want to live. We're kind of doing our part if we bring 1,500 to the table, but that's not a fourth, right? Maybe slightly more than a fourth of that gap, but especially when you look at 2025, because not all of those rooftops are going to get built this year. When you look at 2025, when it's possible that those roofs are built, 1,500 additional is about on par with the 25% contribution. If everyone else in the valley contributes 25%, that's also kind of unlikely. So what we have going on as a trend for what's coming into town is still not meeting our needs. No less the change, no less going back to that initial graph of all the kids that are growing into 18 to 25. Are they going to stay in town? No. All the folks who are 50 plus, are they going to stay in town? We're not providing for them yet. We're just filling our basic gap. So again, I want to remind you, this is the driver. We have not just a desire to live in Eagle, but based on the types of housing that we build, there's a propensity for certain types of jobs to fill certain types of rooftops. And based on how that looks, we can start to understand who's in this economy. These are the folks who are looking for rooftops, accommodation and food service, and they're looking to not pay 71% of them paying more than 30%. We need to get that number a little lower. If they're going to be constructive productive members of the economy, right? If those folks that are making the accommodation food service wages are to have enough discretionary income to depend on as a potential customer for your retail store, for your clothing store, for your restaurant, for your professional service, if they're going to have the money to pay for your goods, they need to have homes that are not taxing their ability, right? But that's what's here. I also want to bring this back up again, because when we talk about the industries that we want to grow here in town, the top ones, the ones with the discretionary income to be able to pay for single-family homes, do they have a home to move to? Right now, we've got 260 some vacant, right? At max, right? Maybe 200 of those are single family. But is that enough to grow an industry? Not just one business, but multiple businesses? I don't know, probably not. So what percentage of that potential 1,500 coming in the door is going to solve the needs of this industry? If those rooftops are built, as a business owner, you should understand how much discretionary income is inside of that rooftop and what's it going to mean for your business. One way around this is internet, right? There's a reason why we all, as professionals who work from our homes, have issues with CenturyLink. Because every time it goes down, our business suffers. These are the industries that benefit from broadband and high-quality internet. One of the strengths that we have as a town, potentially, is our quality of life, but it is rather hard to do business here, separated from the Front Range, right? If we have good internet, these industries all of a sudden become players in our local economy, right? That's important to understand. Why is any sort of better broadband service necessary? It's because we want the industries in green, and they need to have internet here. These are the tourism industries. These are the ones that are already here. They're not going anywhere, at least I hope not. I like living next to Beaver Creek. I'm sure all of you do too. So we have to find a way to accommodate these folks as well. But this isn't just tourism, these are regional service, right? These are the quality of life folks. The rooftops that these guys have or would be best suited for are not the rooftops of single-family homes. And so if we want a better quality of life, if we want businesses that are engaged in that sector to thrive, we need to understand what those jobs look like when they go home at night. 45 slides.